The murder of Martha Moxley, a Halloween night that never ended. On the night of October 30th, 1975, the Bellhaven neighborhood of Greenwich, Connecticut was quiet in the way wealthy enclaves often are. Tree-lined streets, large colonial homes set back behind trimmed hedges, private security at the gated entrance, a sense of insulation from the rest of the world. It was the night before Halloween. Teenagers called it Mischief Night, a night for harmless pranks, toilet paper in trees, eggs thrown at houses, laughter that echoed briefly before curfew. 17-year-old Martha Moxley had plans that evening. She had recently moved to Bellhaven with her mother and brother. She was athletic, outgoing, adjusting to a new school and new social circle. Across the street lived the Skakel family, wealthy, well-connected, relatives of the Kennedy family. Their sons were part of the same teenage circle. That night, Martha left her home to join friends. Witnesses later placed her with the Skakel brothers, Thomas and Michael, and other neighborhood teens. They gathered outside, drank beer, roamed between houses. The atmosphere was loose but not violent. It was suburban restlessness, not danger. Around 9:30 p.m., Martha was last seen alive. She had reportedly left the Skakel residence intending to return home. Her house was only a short walk away, a few hundred feet across manicured lawns. She never made it inside. The next morning, October 31st, her mother noticed something wrong. Martha had not come home. Her bed was untouched. Calls were made, friends contacted. No one had seen her after the night before. By midday, a search began. It did not take long. Martha's body was found in her own backyard beneath a pine tree. She had been bludgeoned to death. The weapon was a golf club, specifically a 6-iron belonging to the Skakel family. The shaft had been broken during the assault. Part of it was found near her body. Another part was located near the Skakel driveway. The positioning suggested she had been attacked close to where she was discovered. She had suffered multiple blows to the head. The brutality shocked even seasoned officers. This was not a robbery. Her clothing remained intact. There were no signs of theft. The golf club, traced to the Skakel home, immediately shifted attention toward the house across the street. Police began interviewing teenage teens. The Skakel brothers gave varying accounts of their movements that night. Thomas stated he had returned home earlier. Michael initially claimed he had been inside the house watching television. Later, he offered different versions over time. The Skakel home itself was expansive. Multiple rooms, large property, access to golf clubs in a garage area. Investigators faced a delicate situation. The Skakels were wealthy and connected. Russell Skakel, their brother's father, was a relative of the Kennedy family. Political influence hovered in the background. From the beginning, some residents of Bellhaven felt the investigation moved cautiously, perhaps too cautiously. In 1975, forensic science was limited. DNA profiling did not exist as we know it today. Crime scene preservation was less rigorous. Witness statements carried more weight, and teenage recollections after a night of drinking were inconsistent. Michael Skakel, 15 at the time, would later become central to the case. But in the immediate aftermath, no arrests were made. The murder remained unsolved. The image of Martha's body beneath the pine tree lingered in the community. A girl killed steps from her own back door in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in America. Late at night, when this story is told slowly, the unsettling element is proximity. Her home was visible from where she died, lights likely still on inside, her mother unaware. Across the street,
The house where the golf club originated stood silent. The murder fractured the illusion of safety in Belhaven. Security gates did not prevent violence. Wealth did not guarantee protection. The golf club itself became symbolic, an object of leisure transformed into a weapon, broken mid-assault. The force required to snap a club shaft indicates intensity, anger, loss of control, or calculated brutality. Years passed without resolution. Investigations reopened periodically. Private detectives hired, books written, rumors circulated. But for nearly 2 decades, no one was charged. The case simmered beneath Greenwich's polished exterior, a cold case that refused to disappear. In the days following the murder of Martha Moxley, the Belhaven neighborhood of Greenwich did not erupt into chaos. It tightened. Conversations moved indoors sooner in the evening. The sense of insulation, the quiet belief that crime belonged elsewhere, fractured. But outwardly there was restraint. The Skakel home across the street remained occupied. Cars entered and exited as usual. The teenagers returned to school. The murder weapon, the 6-iron traced to the Skakel property, should have been the clearest lead. But proximity does not automatically translate to proof. Police interviews began with neighborhood teenagers. Accounts conflicted. Alcohol had been consumed. Memories blurred. Thomas Skakel said he had been with Martha earlier but parted ways before the night ended. Michael Skakel gave multiple versions of his whereabouts over time. At first, he reportedly claimed to have been inside the house watching television. Later, he said he had climbed a tree outside Martha's window that night, hoping to glimpse her. That admission surfaced years later. The detail unsettled investigators because it placed him physically near her home at a critical hour. Yet in 1975, those statements were not immediately leveraged into charges.
The Skakel family hired private investigators early in the process. This created an unusual parallel investigation. Interviews conducted by private firms, transcripts collected independently, law enforcement and private inquiry moving simultaneously. That dual structure complicated narrative consistency. Witnesses sometimes spoke differently to different investigators. Some teenagers later recanted earlier statements. Others claimed they felt pressured. One recurring thread was tension between Martha and one of the Skakel brothers earlier that evening. Reports suggested an argument, nothing violent, but emotional friction. The question lingered: did something escalate after she left their house? The crime scene itself offered limited forensic clarity. Martha had been struck multiple times. The blows were forceful. The broken golf club shaft indicated intensity. There were no eyewitnesses. No neighbors reported hearing screams. The homes in Belhaven were spaced far enough apart that a brief assault could occur unnoticed. The investigation stalled. Years passed. The case cooled. Then in the 1990s, momentum returned. A renewed grand jury inquiry began. New witnesses came forward. Among them were former classmates and acquaintances who claimed Michael Skakel had made incriminating statements during adolescence. Some alleged he had spoken about the murder casually. Others claimed he had hinted at involvement. One witness recalled Michael saying years later that he was concerned he might have done something and not remembered it. These recollections emerged long after the fact. Memory, especially teenage memory filtered through years of retelling, is fragile. But prosecutors began building a case. Michael Skakel, by then an adult, became the focal point. The theory centered on him following Martha after the gathering, possibly encountering her in her yard, possibly attacking her during a confrontation. But motive remained unclear. Jealousy? Rejection? Impulse? The lack of sexual assault evidence complicated motive analysis. The assault appeared focused on bludgeoning. Overkill suggests rage, but rage requires trigger. The case eventually led to Michael Skakel being charged decades after the murder. He was convicted in 2002,
But the legal aftermath would stretch for years. Conviction overturned, appeals granted, conviction reinstated, then vacated again. The courtroom drama became complex, but at its core remains the night of October 30th. Late at night, when the story returns to that pine tree in Martha's yard, the wealth and politics fade. What remains is proximity. Her home visible from where she lay, a golf club taken from across the street, teenagers who had been laughing hours earlier, and silence that followed. The Skakel house stood across from the Moxley home like a mirror. Same manicured lawns, same brick facades, but between them lay a body and a question that would not fade. As decades passed, the case became symbolic of privilege and power intersecting with justice. Some believed influence slowed the initial investigation. Others believed evidence was always too thin for certainty. What cannot be disputed is that Martha Moxley died steps from safety. Her killer, whoever it ultimately proves to be, was someone within reach, not a drifter, not a stranger passing through, but someone inside the gated enclave. And that realization unsettled Belhaven more than any external threat ever could. By the time the case against Martha Moxley reached court in the early 2000s, more than 25 years had passed since the night she was killed. Time alters evidence. It also alters people. Teenagers become adults. Memories calcify or distort. Rumors harden into narrative. Michael Skakel, once a 15-year-old boy in Belhaven, was now a grown man facing trial for murder. The prosecution's case relied heavily on testimony from former classmates and acquaintances. Several witnesses claimed that during adolescence, Michael had spoken in ways that implied guilt. One former classmate testified that Michael once said something along the lines of, "I'm going to get away with murder." Another described conversations in which he allegedly expressed anxiety about being responsible for something terrible. These statements were not recorded at the time. They were recollections offered decades later. Defense attorneys challenged their reliability. Memory under pressure, especially memory revisited repeatedly over years, is vulnerable. Yet juries often weigh emotional testimony heavily. The prosecution argued that the golf club taken from the Skakel home was the key physical link. The 6-iron belonged to a set owned by the Skakel family. It was found broken near Martha's body. The broken shaft and club head were matched to that set. The implication was proximity and access. But proximity is not exclusivity. Many people in Belhaven knew one another. The Skakel property was not impenetrable. Still, the emotional weight of the club originating from across the street carried power. The prosecution's narrative suggested that Michael followed Martha after she left the Skakel gathering. Perhaps there was tension earlier that evening. Perhaps there was rejection. Perhaps there was adolescent anger. In this theory, the attack occurred quickly in her yard. Blows delivered in rapid succession. No extended struggle. No prolonged noise. A violent eruption in the dark. The defense countered with alternative possibilities. Thomas Skakel's whereabouts were questioned again. Other teenage attendees were scrutinized. The lack of physical evidence tying Michael directly to the scene was emphasized. There was no DNA evidence conclusively linking him. No eyewitness, no confession, just the broken golf club and long-delayed recollections. Michael Skakel was convicted in 2002 and sentenced to 20 years to life.
But the story did not end there. Years later, his conviction was overturned due to ineffective assistance of counsel. Appeals followed, legal rulings shifted, convictions reinstated, then vacated. The procedural journey became as complex as the original investigation. But beneath the legal oscillation lies a simpler truth. Martha Moxley was killed in her own yard. Someone in that gated community committed the act. The legal system has wrestled with who. Late at night, when the courtroom fades from focus, the emotional center returns to October 30th, 1975. The last confirmed sighting of Martha walking away from the Skakel house. Her house visible nearby, a few hundred feet. The sense of safety within sightline.
Then the assault, the repeated blows, the broken club, the stillness beneath the pine tree. The wealth of Belhaven amplified scrutiny, because when violence occurs in affluent enclaves, it challenges assumptions. Security gates do not stop rage. Influence does not reverse blunt force trauma. Teenage impulsivity can exist in any zip code. Over time, the case became less about a single suspect and more about institutional tension. Did influence delay justice? Did early investigative missteps compromise clarity? Did memory erosion weaken certainty? Cold cases often suffer from a cruel paradox. Time creates distance that may allow witnesses to speak more freely, but time also erodes accuracy. The human brain reshapes past events unconsciously. Conversations repeated become slightly altered. Certainty grows even as detail fades. For the Moxley family, the legal turbulence did not restore what was lost. Convictions overturned do not erase violence. Appeals do not reconstruct the final moments in that yard. What remains is a neighborhood that can never fully return to its former innocence, and a story that lingers because resolution remains unstable. Some believe the conviction was justified. Others believe reasonable doubt persists. The court record is layered. But in the quiet version of the story, the one told slowly, late at night, the focus remains on proximity and rupture. Two houses facing one another, teenagers laughing hours before, a golf club transformed from sport to weapon, and a body discovered on Halloween morning. The image has endured because it contradicts expectation. Violence in Belhaven was not supposed to happen. Not there, not among families connected to wealth and political lineage. But violence does not require poverty. It does not require broken windows. It requires only proximity and impulse. Over time, the narrative became layered with broader questions. Did early investigative caution protect suspects? Did influence shape initial direction? Or were the facts always too thin for certainty? The absence of definitive physical evidence continues to divide observers. Some believe the conviction was correct. Others believe doubt persists. But regardless of legal outcome, Martha Moxley's death altered the community permanently. The pine tree became a silent witness. The yards between the houses no longer felt neutral. The street, once just pavement connecting neighbors, became the distance between suspicion and grief. Late at night, when the story returns to October 30th, the unsettling element is not the courtroom. It is how small the space was. A few hundred feet, that is all. A walk that should have taken less than a minute. Instead, it ended in violence. There was no stranger climbing fences from outside Belhaven. If the prosecution theory holds, the killer was someone she had been with hours earlier. Someone familiar. Someone within the circle of safety. That is the fracture that lingers. Not randomness, but intimacy. The Martha Moxley case endures because it sits at the edge of certainty, close enough to feel solved, far enough to feel unsettled. And in the quiet hours, when the lights are off and the house is still, it reminds us of something simple and uncomfortable. Distance does not guarantee protection. Familiarity does not eliminate danger. And sometimes, the darkest moment happens within sight of home. Thank you for listening.